The downtown courthouse buzzed with the usual morning activity as attorneys shuffled between courtrooms, clients waited anxiously on hard wooden benches, and court officers maintained order with stern glances. It was just another Tuesday in Judge Patricia Harmon's courtroom, at least that's what everyone thought. Marcus Johnson straightened his navy tie and reviewed his notes one final time. At 35, he had become one of the most respected defense attorneys in the county. Today's case seemed straightforward. His client, Jamal Williams, faced relatively minor charges that Marcus believed were exaggerated by an overzealous prosecutor. All rise. The bailiff called out as Judge Harmon entered the courtroom. Judge Patricia Harmon had presided over this court for 15 years. Known for her strict demeanor and harsh sentences, many attorneys dreaded appearing before her. She moved with rigid confidence to her bench, her gray-streaked hair pulled back tightly, enhancing her severe expression. "Be seated," she commanded, her voice sharp as she glanced down at the day's docket. Case number 47,293, State v. Williams. Marcus rose from his seat. "Marcus Johnson for the defense, Your Honor." "Sarah Reynolds for the prosecution," the assistant district attorney announced. Judge Harmon peered over her reading glasses at Jamal Williams, a 26-year-old electrician who sat nervously beside Marcus. Her lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "Proceed," she instructed the prosecutor. Sarah Reynolds outlined the state's case efficiently. According to her, Jamal had resisted arrest and shown disrespect to officers during a traffic stop. The charges could potentially result in jail time if pursued to their fullest extent. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood with calm confidence. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that my client complied with all lawful orders and—" "Mr. Johnson," Judge Harmon interrupted, "let's not waste the court's time with exaggerated claims." Marcus paused, surprised by the interruption. He continued, "With respect, Your Honor, the police dashcam footage clearly shows." "I've reviewed the evidence, Counselor," she cut in again, her tone dismissive. "Move on." The courtroom tensed. Even the court reporter glanced up briefly from her machine. Marcus had appeared before Judge Harmon many times, but something felt different today. Her interruptions seemed targeted, almost personal. "Your Honor," Marcus tried again, "my client has no prior record. He's a licensed electrician who supports his family and volunteers at the community center. The circumstances of this arrest were—" "Mr. Johnson," Judge Harmon's voice rose sharply, "I said move on. Your client's community service isn't relevant to whether he resisted arrest." Marcus noticed his client shrinking in his seat. Jamal had never been in trouble before, and the weight of the judge's hostility was visibly affecting him. "Your Honor, with all due respect, his character and background are absolutely relevant for sentencing considerations," Marcus replied calmly. Something flashed in Judge Harmon's eyes. She removed her glasses and leaned forward. The courtroom fell completely silent. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps in your neighborhood, resisting police officers is considered acceptable behavior, but in my courtroom, it is not." The loaded implication hung in the air. Several people in the gallery exchanged uncomfortable glances. The court stenographer's fingers paused momentarily before continuing to type. Marcus felt a cold wave wash over him as he recognized the thinly veiled racial undertone in her comment. Still, he maintained his professional composure while making a mental note of her exact words. "Proceeding with our motion to dismiss, Your Honor," Marcus continued steadily, though inside, his mind was racing. This wasn't just about his client anymore. Something much bigger had just happened in Courtroom 4B. The tension in Courtroom 4B thickened after Judge Harmon's comment. Marcus Johnson kept his shoulders squared and his expression neutral, but his mind was working quickly. Years of courtroom experience had taught him to recognize when something crossed the line from merely unfair to potentially actionable. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, "I'd like to enter the dashcam footage as Exhibit A and request the court view it now." Judge Harmon's mouth tightened. "Is that really necessary, Mr. Johnson? I've already reviewed it." "I believe it's critical to my client's defense, Your Honor," Marcus insisted politely but firmly. With obvious reluctance, Judge Harmon nodded to the court technician. "Fine. Play the footage." The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The entire courtroom watched as the video showed Jamal Williams being pulled over. Contrary to the police report, Jamal could clearly be seen following all instructions, placing his hands on the steering wheel and speaking respectfully. When asked to exit the vehicle, he complied immediately. "Stop the video," Marcus requested when it reached the critical moment. "Your Honor, as you can see, my client followed every instruction given to him. The officer's claim that he was combative simply isn't supported by the evidence." Judge Harmon's face had turned slightly red. The video directly contradicted the prosecution's case. "The video doesn't show everything, Counselor," she said dismissively. "Continue playing." As the video continued, it became even more apparent that Jamal had been cooperative throughout the encounter. The courtroom murmured as they watched an officer roughly handcuff Jamal despite his compliance. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "I move that all charges be dismissed based on this evidence." Judge Harmon removed her glasses again, her knuckles white as she gripped them. "Mr. Johnson, you are trying my patience." The officers clearly felt threatened. "By what, Your Honor?" Marcus asked, his voice level but firm. "My client followed every instruction." "Perhaps you need a refresher on respecting this court." Judge Harmon snapped. She turned to Jamal. "And as for your client, it seems he needs a lesson in proper conduct around authority figures." The racial undertone of her comment was now impossible to ignore. Several people in the gallery exchanged shocked glances. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, recording every word. Marcus took a deep breath. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm concerned about the direction of these comments." "Are you questioning my judgment, Mr. Johnson?" Judge Harmon's voice rose. "Maybe in your culture, questioning authority is acceptable, but in my courtroom, you will show proper respect." The insult hung in the air like a thunderclap. A complete silence fell over the courtroom. The prosecutor, Sarah Reynolds, looked down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable. Even the bailiff shifted his weight uneasily. Marcus stood perfectly still, his expression unchanged though his heart pounded. He was acutely aware that every word was being recorded. He looked directly at Judge Harmon. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "I'd like to request a brief recess." Judge Harmon seemed to suddenly realize what she had said. Her face flushed, but her pride wouldn't allow her to back down. "Request denied," she said sharply. "We will proceed." Marcus nodded once. "Then I must formally request that Your Honor recuse herself from this case based on the demonstration of personal bias against my client and myself." The courtroom erupted in hushed whispers. Judge Harmon banged her gavel. "Silence," she demanded. "Mr. Johnson, you are dangerously close to contempt of court." "I understand, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "However, I am obligated to place my objection on the record. The comments directed at both my client and myself appear to reflect racial bias that could prejudice these proceedings." Judge Harmon's face darkened with anger. "That's absurd. You're twisting my words." "The court record will show exactly what was said," Marcus replied simply, glancing briefly at the court reporter who continued typing, her expression professional but her eyes wide. Marcus knew this moment would change everything, for his client, for himself, and perhaps for Judge Harmon too. He had crossed a line from which there was no return, but it was a line that needed to be crossed. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Harmon glared at Marcus Johnson. Her fingers tapped against the bench, a nervous habit she displayed only when truly rattled. "Mr. Johnson," she finally said, her voice deadly quiet, "we will continue with these proceedings as planned. Your motion for recusal is denied." Marcus nodded once, his expression revealing nothing. "Thank you, Your Honor. Then I'd like to continue with my defense." As Marcus resumed presenting his case, he noticed Sarah Reynolds, the prosecutor, shooting concerned glances at the judge. Even she seemed uncomfortable with how the proceedings were unfolding. Meanwhile, court clerk Thomas Garcia had been quietly making notations. A 20-year veteran of the court system, Thomas had seen many things, but Judge Harmon's behavior today crossed lines he couldn't ignore. As Marcus spoke, Thomas discreetly pressed several buttons on his console, ensuring that all recording systems were functioning properly. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, "given the video evidence contradicting the arresting officer's statement, I again move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Mr. Williams." Judge Harmon's jaw tightened. She was tracked. The video evidence clearly showed Jamal's compliance, yet dismissing the case would feel like admitting she had been wrong, something Patricia Harmon had never done in 15 years on the bench. "Motion denied," she declared. "We will proceed to trial next month." Marcus had expected this. "Then I request bail be removed, as my client has demonstrated he is neither a flight risk nor a danger to the community." Judge Harmon seemed to search for a reason to deny this request too, but found none she could articulate. "Fine. Bail is removed. The defendant will remain free until trial. Court is adjourned." She banged her gavel and stood abruptly, gathering her papers before storming toward her chambers. As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus turned to Jamal. "That went as well as could be expected," he said quietly. "What happens now?" Jamal asked, his voice tinged with worry. "She clearly has it out for me." "Don't worry," Marcus reassured him. "What happened today is going to help us more than hurt us." As they spoke, Thomas Garcia approached them, a business card extended toward Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, could I speak with you for a moment?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice low. "In private?" Marcus nodded to Jamal. "Wait for me outside. I'll be right there." Once Jamal had left, Thomas led Marcus to a small conference room and closed the door. "What happened in there today wasn't right," Thomas said without preamble. "I've worked with Judge Harmon for 7 years, and I've noticed patterns, but she's never been this blatant before." Marcus listened carefully as Thomas continued. "I preserved the audio recording and made sure the transcript will be accurate," Thomas explained. "But there's more. I have access to Judge Harmon's sentencing records. For the past 5 years, I've noticed discrepancies in how she sentences defendants based on race." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "You've been tracking this?" Thomas nodded. "After I noticed the pattern, I started keeping notes. Black defendants consistently receive sentences averaging 20% longer than white defendants for identical charges with similar criminal histories." Marcus took a deep breath. "That's significant information, Mr. Garcia. But why are you telling me this now?" "Because what she did today was wrong," Thomas replied simply. "And it wasn't the first time. Just the first time she's been so obvious about it." He handed Marcus a USB drive. "This contains the complete audio from today's hearing, plus my analysis of her sentencing patterns. I've already made copies and secured them elsewhere." Marcus looked at the small drive with amazement. "You realize what this means for your job?" Thomas straightened. "I've been in this system long enough to know that some things matter more than a job, Mr. Johnson. The integrity of the court is one of them." As Marcus pocketed the drive, his phone buzzed with a text message from a colleague at the State Bar Association. "Call me immediately. Judge Harmon just filed a complaint against you for disrespect to the court." Marcus smiled grimly. "It seems Judge Harmon is making this easier for us," he told Thomas, showing him the message. "She's opened the door, and now we're going to walk through it." The offices of the State Judicial Ethics Committee were housed in a stately building downtown. Marcus Johnson sat in the waiting area, his leather portfolio containing everything he had gathered over the past week: the USB drive from Thomas Garcia, official court transcripts, and statements from 3 other attorneys who had witnessed Judge Harmon's behavior. "Mr. Johnson," a woman in a tailored suit appeared in the doorway. "I'm Diane Wilkins, Chief Counsel for the Ethics Committee. Please come in." Marcus followed her into a conference room where 4 committee members sat waiting. The atmosphere was serious but not unfriendly. "We understand you're here regarding Judge Patricia Harmon," Diane began once they were seated. "We should inform you that she has indeed filed a complaint against you for disrespectful conduct in her courtroom." Marcus nodded. "I expected as much. But I'm here because I believe Judge Harmon has demonstrated a pattern of racial bias that compromises her ability to serve impartially." He carefully laid out the events from the courtroom, presenting the transcript that captured Judge Harmon's exact words. The committee members read in silence, their expressions growing more concerned with each page. "These comments are troubling," said Robert Chen, the committee chair. "But a single incident isn't necessarily evidence of a pattern." "I agree," Marcus replied. "Which is why I brought this." He connected the USB drive to the room's computer system. "This contains an analysis of Judge Harmon's sentencing patterns over the past 5 years, compiled by court clerk Thomas Garcia. The screen filled with charts and data tables showing clear disparities in sentencing based on race. The committee members leaned forward, their interest visibly increased. Mr. Garcia has worked in Judge Harmon's courtroom for 7 years, Marcus explained. He began noticing these patterns and documenting them independently. He's prepared to testify if needed. This is significant, Diane murmured, studying the data. Has Mr. Garcia brought this to anyone's attention before? He felt his position was vulnerable, Marcus explained. But after witnessing what happened in court last week, he decided he could no longer remain silent. Robert Chen removed his glasses. You should know that yours isn't the first complaint we've received about Judge Harmon. However, previous concerns were isolated and lacked substantial evidence. I'm not surprised, Marcus replied. The legal community is small. Attorneys fear retaliation if they speak up against a judge. And you don't? Asked another committee member. Marcus smiled slightly. Judge Harmon has already filed a complaint against me. I have little left to lose. Just then, the door opened and a young assistant entered, handing Diane a note. She read it quickly, her eyebrows rising. It seems news travels fast, she said. We just received calls from 3 more attorneys wanting to share experiences with Judge Harmon. All mention racial bias. Marcus nodded. Once someone is brave enough to speak first, others find their courage. We take these allegations very seriously, Robert Chen assured him. The committee will conduct a thorough investigation. Judge Harmon will be notified of the complaints and given opportunity to respond. There's one more thing, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. Since Judge Harmon's complaint against me became known, I've received numerous messages from former defendants who appeared in her court. He showed them his email inbox, filled with subject lines mentioning Judge Harmon. Many described similar experiences of feeling discriminated against, Marcus explained. Some have family members who witnessed the same behavior in court. Diane made notes. We'll need to interview them as part of our investigation. Of course, Marcus agreed. And I should mention that several local news outlets have contacted me. I've declined comment while this matter is under review, but the story is gaining attention. Robert Chen frowned. This could become quite public. Justice should be public, Marcus replied simply. That's why courtrooms have open doors. As the meeting concluded, Diane walked Marcus to the elevator. The committee will move quickly on this. Judge Harmon has been notified to appear next week. Thank you, Marcus said. My client deserves fair treatment, so do all the others who enter that courtroom. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus felt the weight of the past week. A complaint against him could damage his career, but some principles were worth the risk. The justice system could only work when those who upheld it were held to the highest standards. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Marcus divided his time between preparing for Jamal's case and helping the ethics committee gather testimonies. Word had spread quickly through the legal community, and what had begun as a trickle of complaints against Judge Harmon had become a flood. On Thursday morning, Marcus entered the small coffee shop across from the courthouse. Thomas Garcia was already there, nursing a cup of coffee at a corner table. How are you holding up? Marcus asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Thomas gave a tired smile. Better than expected. The court administrator placed me on paid leave while the investigation proceeds. Not quite firing me, but not keeping me around either. I'm sorry, Marcus said. You took a huge risk. Thomas shrugged. 20 years in that system, I've seen too many people get crushed by it. Sometimes you have to stand up. Any regrets? Marcus asked. None, Thomas said firmly. Though my wife might disagree when she sees our next mortgage payment. They shared a brief laugh, finding humor in the serious situation. I've been contacted by 17 former defendants from Judge Harmon's court, Marcus said, keeping his voice low, all with similar stories. 3 had actual recordings from courtroom sessions that their families made despite the no-phone policy. Thomas nodded, not surprised. Her behavior got worse over the years. It's like she stopped trying to hide it. The door to the coffee shop opened, and both men looked up to see Sarah Reynolds, the prosecutor from Jamal's case, entering. She spotted them and, after a moment's hesitation, walked over. Mind if I join you? She asked. Marcus gestured to an empty chair. Please do. Sarah sat down, her expression conflicted. I want you to know that I've been called to testify before the Ethics Committee. And what will you say? Thomas asked directly. Sarah took a deep breath. The truth. I've been in Judge Harmon's courtroom for 3 years. I've seen patterns. Things I convinced myself were just her being tough on crime. But, Marcus prompted. But after what happened last week, I can't pretend anymore. She looked at Marcus. What she said to you was inexcusable, and it wasn't an isolated incident. Marcus nodded, understanding her position. It's not easy to speak up. No, it's not, Sarah agreed. Especially when you benefit from the bias. I won more cases in her court than any other prosecutor. I told myself it was because of my preparation, but... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Thomas's phone buzzed. He checked it and his eyes widened. Judge Harmon just arrived at the Ethics Committee hearing. She brought the Chief Justice with her. Marcus frowned. Robert Blackwell? Why would he be there? They're old friends, Sarah explained. They served on the appellate court together before she took the district bench. Could he influence the proceedings? Marcus asked. Sarah shrugged. He shouldn't, but he has significant sway in the judicial community. Just then, Marcus's phone rang. It was Diane Wilkins from the Ethics Committee. Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice tight. Judge Harmon has arrived with Chief Justice Blackwell, who is demanding to observe the proceedings. She's also brought personal character witnesses including Mayor Wilson and State Senator Grayson. Marcus wasn't surprised. She's trying to intimidate the committee. It's working on some members, Diane admitted. But we need you here. There's something else. Judge Harmon is claiming the court recordings were tampered with and that Thomas Garcia has a personal vendetta against her. Marcus looked at Thomas, who shook his head in disbelief. We'll be there in 15 minutes, Marcus promised. After hanging up, he turned to his companions. Judge Harmon is pulling out all the stops. This just went from an ethics inquiry to a full-blown battle. Thomas straightened his shoulders. Then we better be ready to fight. Sarah stood with them. I'll come too. It's time everyone heard the truth about what happens in courtroom 4B. Together, they left the coffee shop, crossing the street toward a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The hearing room of the State Judicial Ethics Committee felt smaller than usual with so many important figures present. Judge Patricia Harmon sat rigidly at one table, flanked by her attorney and 3 character witnesses. Chief Justice Blackwell occupied a chair directly behind her, his presence casting an imposing shadow over the proceedings. When Marcus, Thomas, and Sarah entered, all eyes turned to them. Diane Wilkins approached quickly, speaking in a hushed tone. Judge Harmon's attorney is demanding that Thomas be excluded as he's under investigation for allegedly tampering with court records, she explained. Thomas's face flushed with indignation. That's completely false. We know, Diane assured him, but they're throwing everything they can at this to discredit you both. The committee members took their seats at the raised table. Robert Chen cleared his throat. This hearing will now come to order, he announced. We are here to consider allegations of judicial misconduct against Judge Patricia Harmon. Judge Harmon's attorney, a silver-haired man named Lawrence Stephens, stood immediately. Before we proceed, I must object to the presence of Thomas Garcia. He is currently under investigation for evidence tampering. That investigation was initiated by Judge Harmon herself only after Mr. Garcia provided evidence against her, Marcus countered, rising to his feet. It's clearly retaliatory. Chief Justice Blackwell leaned forward. Mr. Chen, I must express my concern about these proceedings. Judge Harmon has served our courts admirably for 15 years. Robert Chen remained composed. Your concern is noted, Chief Justice, but this committee operates independently, as you well know. A murmur ran through the room. It was unusual for a committee chair to stand up to the Chief Justice so directly. We will hear from all parties, Chen continued. Mr. Garcia will remain, as no formal charges have been filed against him. Judge Harmon whispered furiously to her attorney, her face tight with anger. Now, Chen said, we'll begin with Mr. Johnson's testimony. Marcus approached the table, aware of all eyes upon him. He presented his evidence methodically, including the court transcripts, the sentencing data, and statements from former defendants. The pattern is clear, he concluded. Judge Harmon has consistently demonstrated bias against black defendants and attorneys, resulting in harsher sentences and unfair treatment in her courtroom. Lawrence Stephens cross-examined him aggressively. Isn't it true, Mr. Johnson, that you filed this complaint only after Judge Harmon reported you for unprofessional conduct? No, Marcus replied calmly. I filed it because justice should be blind, and in Judge Harmon's courtroom, it clearly isn't. Next, Thomas testified about the sentencing disparities he had documented over years. His hands trembled slightly as he presented his evidence, but his voice remained steady. These aren't just numbers, he explained. Each one represents a person who received a harsher sentence because of their race. When Sarah Reynolds took the stand, a hush fell over the room. As a prosecutor, her testimony carried special weight. I've observed Judge Harmon consistently favor the prosecution in cases with black defendants, she stated firmly. At first, I didn't speak up because it benefited my record. I'm not proud of that silence. Judge Harmon's face darkened with each testimony. When it was finally her turn to speak, she approached the table with cold dignity. These allegations are absurd, she declared. My sentencing decisions are based on the law, not race. Mr. Garcia clearly has a vendetta against me, and Mr. Johnson is simply retaliating for being properly disciplined for his courtroom behavior. As she spoke, the door to the hearing room opened quietly. A young woman entered and handed a note to Diane Wilkins, who read it and then passed it to Robert Chen. Chen interrupted Judge Harmon mid-sentence. I apologize, Your Honor, but we just received information that requires immediate attention. He looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Johnson, it seems that 3 more judges have come forward with concerns about Judge Harmon's conduct during joint proceedings and bench conferences. They're waiting outside. A wave of whispers swept the room. Judge Harmon's confident expression faltered for the first time. This is outrageous, Chief Justice Blackwell protested, standing up. This has become a witch hunt. No, Your Honor, Marcus replied, meeting his gaze steadily. This is accountability, something too rare in our justice system. The Ethics Committee hearing stretched into its 5th hour. The 3 judges who had come forward, Judges Ramirez, Patel, and Washington, each testified about troubling comments Judge Harmon had made in private chambers and during judicial conferences. She referred to a defendant's neighborhood as that part of town where nobody follows the law. Judge Ramirez recalled. When I challenged her, she said I was being too sensitive because of my background. Judge Patel described overhearing Judge Harmon tell a young prosecutor that he didn't need to worry about evidence in a case with a black defendant because they always look guilty to the jury anyway. With each new testimony, Judge Harmon's face grew paler. Her attorney repeatedly objected, claiming these were hearsay and out of context, but the pattern was becoming undeniable. By late afternoon, the committee called for a 1-hour recess to review all evidence. Judge Harmon huddled with her attorney and Chief Justice Blackwell in a corner of the room. Their hushed conversation looked intense, with Blackwell shaking his head repeatedly. Marcus, Thomas, and Sarah stepped into the hallway for fresh air. I never expected this many people to come forward, Thomas admitted. She's always been so powerful. Everyone was afraid. Fear only works until someone stands up, Marcus replied. Then courage becomes contagious. A young clerk approached them. Mr. Johnson, the committee would like to see you in the conference room, alone. Marcus followed her down the hall, wondering what this private meeting could mean. Inside, he found Robert Chen and Diane Wilkins waiting. We wanted to speak with you off the record, Chen explained. Judge Harmon's attorney has approached us with a potential resolution. What kind of resolution? Marcus asked cautiously. Judge Harmon would agree to take early retirement, effective immediately, Diane explained. In exchange, the committee would issue a statement citing health reasons for her departure, with no public findings of misconduct. Marcus frowned. A cover-up. A compromise, Chen corrected. The committee is divided. Some members believe a public censure would damage trust in the judiciary. And sweeping racism under the rug wouldn't? Marcus challenged. Diane sighed. It's complicated. Chief Justice Blackwell has implied there could be budget repercussions for the committee if we publicly censure a sitting judge. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. So the system protects itself again. We thought you should know what's being discussed, Chen said. Your client would still have his charges dismissed, and Judge Harmon would be off the bench. But what about all the people she's already sentenced unfairly? Marcus asked. What about the public's right to know what happened in that courtroom? Neither committee member answered. When Marcus returned to the hallway, he found Jamal Williams had arrived. Seeing his client reminded him of what this fight was really about. What's happening? Jamal asked. Marcus explained the proposed deal in a low voice. Jamal listened carefully, then asked, What do you think I should do? It's not just about you anymore, Marcus replied honestly. This affects everyone who's ever stood in her courtroom. Jamal nodded slowly. Then we need to see it through. All the way. When the hearing resumed, the tension in the room was palpable. Judge Harmon's attorney approached the committee first. My client would like to propose a resolution, he began, outlining the retirement plan. Robert Chen nodded. The committee will consider this proposal. Does anyone wish to comment before we deliberate? Marcus stood up. I do. He walked to the center of the room, aware of all eyes on him. The proposal before you asked us all to pretend that justice was served in Judge Harmon's courtroom, to pretend that her health is the issue, not her bias. He looked directly at Judge Harmon. But the defendants who received harsher sentences because of their race can't pretend. The attorneys who were belittled because of their background can't pretend. And this committee shouldn't pretend either. Chief Justice Blackwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. True justice requires transparency, Marcus continued. It requires accountability. And sometimes it requires courage to face uncomfortable truths. As he finished speaking, the doors at the back of the room opened. Television cameras and reporters filled the doorway. Someone had alerted the media. Judge Harmon's face drained of color as she realized that, one way or another, this story would now be told. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the state Supreme Court building as crowds gathered outside. 3 weeks had passed since the Ethics Committee hearing, and today the final decision would be announced. Marcus Johnson straightened his tie as he approached the steps. Beside him walked Thomas Garcia, Sarah Reynolds, and Jamal Williams. In the days following the explosive hearing, they had become unexpected allies in a fight larger than any of them had anticipated. Nervous? Jamal asked Marcus as they climbed the steps. A little, Marcus admitted. But whatever happens today, you helped change something important. The committee's deliberations have been intense and private, but leaks to the media had painted a picture of heated debate. Chief Justice Blackwell had reportedly threatened committee members with professional consequences if Judge Harmon faced public censure. Yet others on the committee had stood firm, arguing that transparency was essential to restore public trust. Inside the building, the main hearing room was packed with journalists, attorneys, and community members. At the front sat Judge Patricia Harmon, her posture rigid and her eyes fixed straight ahead. She no longer had Chief Justice Blackwell beside her. He had recused himself from further involvement after media scrutiny of their close relationship raised questions about conflicts of interest. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the 5 members of the Ethics Committee entered and took their seats at the raised table. Robert Chen's face revealed nothing as he called the room to order. After thorough review of all evidence and testimony, Chen began. This committee has reached a unanimous decision regarding the conduct of Judge Patricia Harmon. The room fell completely silent. The evidence shows a clear and disturbing pattern of racial bias in Judge Harmon's courtroom, affecting both defendants and attorneys. Such conduct undermines the very foundation of our justice system and cannot be tolerated from those entrusted to uphold the law. Judge Harmon's shoulders stiffened, but she remained motionless. Therefore, this committee recommends the immediate removal of Judge Patricia Harmon from the bench and the review of all cases over which she presided that involved minority defendants or attorneys. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by murmurs of surprise. Removal was the harshest punishment possible, one rarely implemented. Furthermore, Chen continued, we are establishing a judicial review panel to examine potential bias throughout our court system. This panel will include community representatives as well as legal professionals. Judge Harmon finally moved, leaning to whisper to her attorney, who shook his head grimly. Their offer of quiet retirement had been rejected. This would now become part of the public record, her legacy forever tarnished. As the formal proceedings concluded, reporters rushed toward Marcus and his companions. Camera lights flashed as microphones were thrust forward. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel about the decision?" one reporter asked. Marcus glanced at Jamal before answering. "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about making our justice system live up to its name. Today is a step in that direction." 3 months later, Marcus sat in his office reviewing files. The aftermath of Judge Harmon's removal had been far-reaching. Over 200 cases were under review, with dozens of sentences already reduced or vacated. Thomas Garcia had been hired by the new Judicial Review Panel, using his data analysis skills to identify potential patterns of bias throughout the state court system. A knock at his door interrupted his work. It was Jamal Williams. "Just wanted to stop by and say thank you again," Jamal said, entering with a small gift bag. "I got my old job back, and the company even promoted me to supervisor." Marcus smiled. "That's great news." "This is for you," Jamal said, handing him the bag. Inside was a small wooden plaque with a simple inscription: "Justice is not just about laws, but about courage." As Jamal left, Marcus placed the plaque on his desk. His phone buzzed with a news alert. The State Bar Association had just announced new mandatory training for all judges on implicit bias. It wasn't a perfect ending. The justice system still had deep problems to address. But standing up against one injustice had created ripples that continued to spread. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, that's how change begins, not with grand gestures, but with one person refusing to stay silent when faced with wrong. Outside his window, the courthouse stood in the distance, its facade unchanged yet somehow different now. Inside those walls, the pursuit of justice continued, imperfect, challenging, but moving slowly toward something better.